The year is 1932. In the remote farmlands of Western Australia, a strange problem is beginning to unfold. Just a few years earlier, soldiers had returned home after serving in the First World War. Many were given land by the government, encouraged to take up farming and build a new life. At first, the opportunity seemed promising, but the reality was far more difficult. The land was dry and unforgiving, rainfall was inconsistent, and much of the soil was poor for growing crops. Farmers were expected to clear large areas of land themselves, often with limited equipment and little experience. Many struggled to make their farms profitable. Then, as the farming season began, something unexpected appeared on the horizon. Thousands of large, flightless birds began moving inland. These birds were emus. They can grow up to 6 feet tall, and they can run at speeds of nearly 30 miles per hour. And during migration season, they travel in large groups across the countryside. That year, an estimated 20,000 emus entered the farming regions of Western Australia. As they moved across the land, they began trampling crops, breaking fences, and consuming large amounts of wheat. For farmers already under pressure, the damage was devastating. They needed help, and so they turned to the government. What followed would become one of the most unusual events in modern history. A military operation launched not against an enemy nation, but against birds. By the early 1930s, farming in Western Australia was already facing serious challenges. The government had introduced what was known as a settlement scheme, offering land to returning soldiers. But much of this land was not ideal for agriculture. It was often located in remote areas far from infrastructure such as roads, supply routes, and markets. The soil quality varied, and in many places it lacked the nutrients needed for reliable crop yields. Rainfall was unpredictable, making it difficult to plant and harvest crops. In some seasons, those crops would fail entirely. Farmers also faced financial pressure. The global economy was in decline during the Great Depression, and wheat prices had dropped significantly, meaning farmers were earning far less for the crops they managed to produce. At the same time, they still had to invest in equipment, fencing, and land maintenance. For many, it was a constant struggle just to break even. And then came the emus. Each year, emus migrate inland after breeding season in search of food and water. In 1932, their migration path brought them directly into newly established farming areas. The birds travelled in large groups, sometimes numbering in the thousands. As they moved through farmland, crops were eaten or flattened, fences were broken as emus pushed through them, and fields were left damaged beyond recovery. But the damage didn't stop there. The broken fences allowed other animals, particularly rabbits, to enter farmland more easily, causing even further destruction. For farmers already struggling with poor land, low income, and unpredictable weather, this was the breaking point. They began demanding action immediately. In response to the growing pressures, the Australian government made an unusual decision. They had decided they would deploy the military. In November 1932, a small unit of soldiers was sent to Western Australia, led by Major G.P.W. Meredith. They were equipped with 2 things: a Lewis machine gun and 10,000 rounds of ammunition per soldier. Their objective was clear: reduce the emu population, protect the farmland. On paper, it seemed straightforward. The emus were large targets, and they moved in groups. They had no defense against modern weapons, of course. But somehow, it still appeared to be an impossible task. Things began going wrong immediately. The soldiers located groups of emus and prepared to engage. At first, they attempted to ambush the birds, but as soon as they moved into position, the emus reacted. Instead of staying together, the birds scattered. They broke into smaller groups, running in different directions at very high speeds. The soldiers opened fire, but hitting the targets proved very difficult. The emus were fast, unpredictable, and constantly moving. In one early encounter, soldiers fired into a large group at close range, but after only a few shots, the machine gun jammed. By the time it was working again, most of the emus had already escaped. What was expected to be a quick operation was becoming increasingly difficult, as issues like this arose regularly. As the operation continued, something became clear. The emus were not behaving in predictable ways. They didn't remain in large groups for long, and instead they split into smaller clusters spreading out across the landscape. When threatened, they scattered quickly, making them extremely difficult to track. Attempts were made to improve the strategy. At one point, soldiers mounted a machine gun onto a moving vehicle, hoping to chase the birds more effectively. But the terrain made driving really difficult. The land was uneven, and with rough ground, that limited the speed and control of the vehicles. The vehicle struggled to keep up because of this, and firing accurately whilst moving proved nearly impossible. Despite thousands of rounds being used, very few emus were actually eliminated. After several days, the results were clear. The operation was not working. The emu population had not been significantly reduced, and the damage to farmland had continued. The cost of the operation was increasing, and news of the situation was beginning to spread. What had started as a serious attempt to support struggling farmers was now being seen as a failure. Faced with growing pressure, the government had to make a decision. The operation would now be stopped, and the soldiers were withdrawn. The emus, however, remained, and the war, in effect, was over. The outcome was undeniable. The emus had won. Although the military operation had ended, the problem itself did not disappear. Farmers continued to deal with emus into the years that followed, but this time different approaches were used. Fencing systems were improved to better withstand pressure from animals, and bounty programs were introduced, offering financial incentives for controlling emu populations. Over time, these methods proved more effective, and the large-scale damage seen in 1932 was reduced. The situation stabilised, but the events of that year were never forgotten. This became known as the Great Emu War. In the years that followed, the approach changed. Instead of force, farmers turned to more practical solutions: stronger fencing, better planning, and controlled population measures. The problem was never fully eliminated, but it was managed, a reminder that sometimes the most effective solutions aren't always the most powerful ones. History has seen some other moments where humans attempted to control nature and failed. In the early 1900s, farmers in North America introduced a new species to control pests, only to create even larger ecological problems. Another example is in China during the 1950s. A campaign to eliminate sparrows led to an explosion in insect populations, causing widespread crop damage. And even in Australia itself, the introduction of rabbits in the 19th century resulted in one of the most destructive environmental outbreaks in history, spreading across the continent and devastating farmland. Each of these moments followed a similar pattern: an attempt to solve a problem quickly, using force or intervention, without fully understanding the system behind it. And each time the outcome served as the same reminder that nature is rarely as simple as it seems.